Imagine walking every step of the way around the Earth. No shortcuts, no broken paths. Just one continuous line of footsteps that connect across continents, oceans, and frozen wastelands. For most, it sounds impossible. Karl is the only person in history to ever truly walk around the entire planet from Punta Arenas, Chile, to his home in Hull, England, with just one rule: no transport of any kind. His mission is to cover a staggering 36,000 miles and expected to take not less than 12 years. But little did he know that the journey would take almost 3 decades. This is the story of Karl Bushby and the Goliath Expedition, the longest unbroken walk in human history.
Karl Bushby's adult life began in the ranks of the British paratroopers. Born into a family steeped in military tradition, he followed that path at just 16 years old, enlisting as a junior soldier. For the next 12 years, he served his country, disciplined, resilient, and always pushing himself to the limit. He was a paratrooper who couldn't seem to pass his physicals. For 18 long months, Karl Bushby was a man fighting against the limits of his own body, failing the brutal P Company selection 4 times. In the elite world of the British Parachute Regiment, he was, by all measures, not a natural. He wasn't born physically gifted. He was a liability. But where he lacked in natural physicality, he possessed in spades a stubborn, unyielding resolve. It was a resolve that convinced his superiors to keep him around, to give him a 5th and final chance. He finally passed, but the victory felt hollow. The feeling of having to prove himself, of knowing he could do more, never left him. But Karl's ambitions stretched far beyond the military. Adventure had always been in his blood from childhood. He was drawn to the horizon, to the unknown places just out of sight. His years in uniform only sharpened that obsession, giving him glimpses of distant lands that would later ignite an even bigger dream. In 1997, Karl had a thought. Why not walk around the entire globe? Why not experience the wilderness of the Earth? He proposed his plan to his unit, but nobody believed it was possible. They laughed and made fun of him. A few months later, Karl left the army not to settle down, but to chase what he would call the greatest challenge of his life, the Goliath Expedition. 8 months later, Karl found himself in Punta Arenas, Chile, at the southmost edge of South America, standing at the farthest point from his home in England. On November 1st, 1998, Karl looked north across a journey of more than 36,000 miles. With $500 in his pocket, a pair of donated boots, and no sponsors, but only the sheer determination to walk back home. He was no longer chasing adventure.
For 2 years, Karl walked north, through Chile, Peru, and Ecuador. He was on schedule to the day, but ahead of him lay the first great filter of his journey, a place where the Pan-American Highway simply stops. A 200-mile walk through impenetrable jungle, rivers, and mountains known as the Darien Gap. At the time, Colombia was like kidnap central of the world. It was in a virtual civil war. Karl's father sent him a professional will form to sign, just in case he couldn't make it across the border. Just 2 days into Colombia, Karl was camping outside the city near the woods when a torchlight hit the outside of the tent. He stuck his head out and was greeted with 2 people in ski masks with M16s. He thought it was the ELN, a group that makes their living from kidnapping Westerners walking down the road in the war zone. But it wasn't them. It was the Colombian army who had mistaken him for a threat near a sensitive airfield. It was a terrifying but lucky first encounter. For the next several weeks, Karl moved like a ghost through the conflict. He went through Colombia like smoke drifting across a battlefield. He stayed with soldiers one day and the next day with a group of armed men. Karl slipped through and faced his first major obstacle, the Darien Gap. The The Darien Gap was a lawless war zone, a battleground for FARC guerrillas, right-wing paramilitaries, and drug cartels. It was a place littered with horror stories of journalists, aid workers, and tourists who had entered and never returned. To slip through the Darien Gap, Karl would require a different strategy. He had to cross on foot, without boats. It was an escape and evasion exercise planned with his ex-Special Forces father. The most dangerous part was a 60-kilometer dirt track controlled entirely by FARC and its allies. Karl was told that if he got caught by the FARC guerrillas, they won't shoot him, because the sound of a gun will give away their position. Instead, they'll put him under the knife. He set off anyway, walking past dug-in Colombian soldiers who stared at him as if he were a dead man walking. He spent a night halfway down the track, hidden, eating cold food, making no sound. Just before the light disappeared, he saw a 20-man patrol past him 10 feet from where he was hiding. He made it through. And finally, after 2 months of unimaginable stress, he emerged from the jungle into Panama. On reaching the border with Panama, Karl was extremely sick and exhausted, but his ordeal wasn't over. He was immediately arrested by the Panamanian police. Suspected of being a spy or a mercenary, he was thrown into a crowded jail and spent 18 days in prison before Panamanian intelligence realized his military background and finally cleared him with the British embassy. He had survived the Darien Gap.
Having conquered the South, his extraordinary journey pressed on through Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and across the heart of Central America. Reaching the north in late 2001, not long after 9/11. Suddenly, there were rules for everything. The police were constantly called on him. They wouldn't even let him near the public library, their hands on their holsters, seeing a shady character with a strange cart on wheels. Then came the physical extremes. He walked into the deserts of Arizona and Nevada. In mid-summer, the temperature soared to 51 degrees Celsius. He suffered nosebleeds and collapsed from the heat. He tried walking at night, but it was impossible to sleep during the day. He became more exhausted, hallucinating from sheer exhaustion. He pushed north, up through Utah, Montana, and into Canada, eventually tackling the Alaska Highway. In his 6th year, just as planned, he reached Fairbanks, Alaska. By March 2006, he had crossed the Americas. But now, he faced an open ocean. The Bering Strait is a 57-mile gap of treacherous sea ice separating North America from Russia. It was too waterlogged to cross in the summer, so he waited for winter. He and a French adventurer, Dimitri Kiefer, who heard about Karl's plan and volunteered to join for the Bering Strait crossing, set off too early in December. Their plan was aggressive. Instead of trying to hop between ice floes, they would become Arctic marine sea mammals, wearing special immersion suits. They would swim through the leads of open water and slush, hauling their 400-pound sleds behind them. For the first 2 days, it seemed hopeless. They were being dragged north at 2 miles an hour, making no progress west, stuck in an unimaginable soup of slush. It felt like it was already over. And then, a miracle. The relentless current stopped. The temperature, which had been unseasonably warm, plummeted, freezing the surface of the slushy sea and creating a solid path. The wind, in one of the windiest places on Earth, simply died. It was like watching Moses part the Red Sea. They started making progress. For 14 days, they fought their way across. The temperature plummeted to its own extreme, minus 51 degrees Celsius. From a high of 51 to a low of minus 51, their bodies pushed to the absolute limit. Finally, exhausted, it took them 4 months of brutal effort just to reach the shores of Siberia, despite drifting 8 kilometers off coast. They were the first people in history to walk from North America to Russia. But the Russians were not impressed.
By 2007, Bushby's greatest enemy wasn't the wilderness, it was bureaucracy. Their arrival in Russia triggered an immediate reaction. The problem began before they even stepped on the ice. A travel agency in Seattle, tasked with securing their visas, had dismissed their plan as a drug-fueled fantasy. Instead of submitting their real itinerary, the agency told the Russian authorities that Karl and Dmitry would be flying into Vladivostok. So when they appeared on the coast of Chukotka, the Russians saw two men who had not only crossed illegally into a highly restricted military zone, but had done so with fraudulent visas. Their story of walking across the Bering Strait was dismissed as absurd. The FSB, the Russian security service, was convinced they were spies delivered by a submarine. They were detained, interrogated for hours, and confined to a remote village. At a ridiculous court hearing, they were found guilty of administrative violations. The border guards pushed for jail time. Karl was facing deportation and a long-term ban from Russia, which would end his journey. But then, the story hit the international press. The governor of the region was Roman Abramovich, the billionaire owner of the Chelsea Football Club. Through a back-channel conversation with Britain's deputy prime minister, a deal was struck. Karl would be allowed to continue. This political solution only deepened the suspicion of the FSB. They were convinced he was something he wasn't. They went through his laptop and found photos of him on a US firing range with American soldiers holding pimped-out weapons. Combined with his military background, the case against him, in their minds, was sealed. For the next 5 years, he was trapped in a cat-and-mouse game. The Russians would only grant him 3-month visas, forcing him to travel in short, agonizing bursts during the brutal Siberian winters. He was assigned an FSB handler. He was subjected to regular interviews, long nights where agents would try to get him drunk on expensive vodka, leaning across the table and slurring, "We know who you are." The threats were subtle but constant. If you disappeared in the tundra, they'd say, no one would ever know. Finally, they made their move. As he was nearing the edge of the restricted zone, they intercepted him, accused him of straying from his permitted route, and hit him with a 5-year visa ban. The journey was over. He was stuck. Back in the US, his sponsor came up with a crazy idea, one Karl initially laughed at. Let's walk to the Russian embassy. A 3,500-mile walk in the wrong direction, from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., to challenge a visa ban issued by Putin's own security service. It seemed impossible, but there were no other options. For a year, he walked across America again, this time as a media campaign, and incredibly, it worked. The Washington Post ran a story, someone at the embassy saw it and reached out. Just like that, the ban was overturned. The FSB never bothered him again, and he was finally able to walk out of the Siberian tundra and into Mongolia by 2012.
The world continued to unfold before Karl as he crossed the vastness of Mongolia, navigated the politically sensitive Xinjiang province of China, and pushed on through the ancient landscapes of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. By 2019, he reached the border of Turkmenistan and Iran. He was on the cusp of entering the Middle East, with Europe finally in his sights. And then, the world shut down again. Tensions flared between the United States and Iran. He couldn't risk it. Going around Russia again, neither he couldn't go through Iran. The geopolitical situation became too volatile as he was stuck in his analysis paralysis. The world was consumed by the pandemic. The border shut down. He remained in a state of limbo. His path forward is blocked by geopolitics. To go south of the Caspian Sea requires getting into Iran, a near impossibility on a British passport. To go north means re-entering Russia, a country that doesn't like him, especially now with the world more divided than ever. He is in the toughest corner. After nearly a quarter of a century on the road, after surviving guerrillas, deserts, Arctic storms, and the KGB's successors, his greatest challenge is a map full of closed borders. It cost Karl 4 years of geopolitical tensions, visa issues, and the COVID-19 pandemic. In the August of 2024, after he ran out of options, Karl and a fellow adventurer, Angela Maxwell, decided to swim across the Caspian Sea from Kazakhstan to Azerbaijan using a support boat only for rest and sleep. This ambitious 186-mile swim was supported by the Azerbaijani government and accompanied by Azerbaijani national swimmers Anastasia and Abdurrahman Rustamov. They crossed the Caspian Sea in 30 days, becoming the first people to do so, covering 288 kilometers with 132 hours of swimming. This route allowed Bushby to bypass the geopolitical challenges and continue his journey. By June 2025, Karl was waiting in Armenia for a visa to Turkey. By September 1, 2025, after nearly 3 decades, 26 countries and 46,000 kilometers, Karl is now walking across Europe and expected to finally return home by 2026. Now only a handful of countries stand between Karl Bushby and Hull. If successful, his footsteps will mark the longest continuous walk in history, an unbroken line circling the globe.